my name is Dominique Lignito-Packard.
And my name is Sharon.
This is our presentation on LGBTQ health and mental health disparities for Mental Health Policy Practice, Social Work 280.
So before we begin, I would like to go through some few definitions. So LGBTQ plus means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Some people also use the Q to stand for questioning, meaning people who are figuring out their sexual orientation or gender identity. Although lesbian, gay men, bisexual men and women, and transgender people each are separate populations, they are frequently considered as a group. The primary driving force behind the combining these populations is that they are non-heterosexual or gender non-conforming and are frequently stigmatized as a consequence. Health disparities. According to CDC, health disparities are preventable differences in the burden of a disease, injury, violence, or opportunity to achieve optimal health that are experienced by social disadvantaged populations. For our problem definition, LGBTQ plus people are more likely to experience a host of mental, behavioral, physical health inequalities as a result of a stigma misunderstanding, leading to health disparities linked to social stigmas, discrimination, and denial to their civil and human rights. There are 4.5% of the US population is part of the LGBTQ population, which is nearly around 15 million people. Of those 15 million people, 1/3 of them are experiencing mental health illnesses. The percentage is an increase from 4.1 an increase from 2016. So there has been definitely an increase throughout the years. 5.1% of are women and 3.9% are men. The scope of the problem. So we are going to discuss behavioral health, physical health, and as well as access to care. Behavioral health includes mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. Physical health addresses LGBTQ people are greater risk for certain conditions, diseases, as well as infections. Access to care. LGBTQ people have less access to healthcare, less access to healthcare that they need. So more of a scope of the problem that we're addressing is in a survey, LGBTQ plus people are more than half of all reported that they have faced cases of providers denying care, using harsh language, or blaming the patients to sexual orientation or gender identity as a cause of an illness. Despite greater need, LGBTQ plus people often experience limited access to healthcare, exclusion from research, negative experience of discrimination or prejudice from a health care provider, and a lack of healthcare provider knowledge of experiencing working with LGBTQ plus people. These healthcare experience specific to LGBTQ status can be discouraging and lead to a decrease of engagement of services. Treatment issues. Approximately 8% of LGBTQ plus individuals and nearly 27% of transgender individuals report being denied needing healthcare outright. In mental health care, stigma, lack of cultural sensitivity, and unconscious and conscious re-linked address to sexual may hamper effectiveness of care.
So looking at the setting of disparities for LGBTQ plus individuals, research suggests that LGBTQ plus individuals face disparities linked to societal stigma, discrimination, and denial of their civil and human rights. So we can see the evidence of these disparities occurring in private and public settings. For example, healthcare, housing, education, the legal system, family and social life, as well as employment. And that means that these disparities are occurring oftentimes on a daily basis. because of the constellation of factors that are influencing all these different aspects of living. These essentially increase the likelihood of poor health and mental health outcomes for LGBTQ plus individuals. So looking at the history here, individuals have been documented throughout history in every culture, whether they've been accepted or persecuted. However, there's a long history of discrimination of sexual and gender minority individuals. LGBTQ plus people have been targets for hate, violence, and systemic injustices throughout US history, which has created a culture and environment that has led to poor health outcomes as compared to heterosexual and cisgender individuals. So while the history is quite long, and this timeline does not cover all of it, here's just a few really important events that have occurred in United States history that have really impacted or driven some of the major health and mental health disparities for this population. In 1950, there was a Senate report distributed to Congress, and LGBTQ people were fired from government and military positions. Essentially, the report said that sexual and gender minority individuals were mentally ill and immoral. Also in 1962, an important date on the timeline, Illinois became the first state in the United States to decriminalize homosexuality. In 1973, the American Psychological Association decided to remove homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And this was signaling the depathologizing of LGB identities. However, gender transition process that many transgender people seek to affirm their gender identity is currently still categorized as a mental disorder in the DSM. In 1981, we see the HIV epidemic emerges, and this was largely ignored by the president at the time. President Reagan did not actually acknowledge the HIV epidemic until 1987, so about 6 years later. And unfortunately, as a result, many LGBTQ people died and suffered significantly because of the lack of healthcare and support for HIV needs at that time. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled to protect the rights of same-sex couples to marry, and marriage equality was signed into law. So that was a significant point in the timeline. However, in 2017 through 2020, the Trump administration began a series of unprecedented attacks against LGBTQ plus Americans, including rolling back many rights and also appointing 3 anti-LGBTQ Supreme Court justices. While in 2021, President Biden just recently signed an executive order banning discrimination of LGBTQ plus individuals. So that was a really great step in the right direction. And while LGBTQ plus rights have begun to gain support socially and legally, there's still much room for progress, as you can see, that can make an impact on the health and mental health disparities. So here, looking at the causes of LGBTQ health and mental health disparities, there are many factors that influence this. In the United States, a 2011 report compiled by the Institute of Medicine identified causes contributing to disparities, including stigma, laws and policies, and barriers to care, which are driven by discrimination. So here for stigma, we can see that health and mental health disparities for LGBTQ plus individuals are related to stigma. Minority stress is a theory that identifies the chronic and additional stress LGBTQ plus individuals experience caused by experiences associated with the discrimination and stigma in public and private realms and dimensions of daily living. Looking at the history of laws and policies that have led to disparities. Federal law and the majority of states lack explicit non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus people in housing, at school, and healthcare, and elsewhere, leaving many people vulnerable and perpetuating health disparities. Other laws and policies that enforce inequity are religious exemption laws. Religious freedom has often been conflated with the right to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people, and these laws allow people, churches, nonprofit organizations, and sometimes corporations to seek exemptions from providing services that burden their religious beliefs. A report from the Movement Advancement Project points to the immense progress that has been made with policies that promote protections for LGBTQ plus people over time. And as you can see here in this infographic, there's a number of states with varying levels of protections for LGBTQ plus people. So if we were to compare the map on the left for 2010 to the map on the right in the year 2020, we can see a significant increase in the laws that offer a higher level of protection. And just to give some helpful numbers here, thinking about the country as a whole, currently 12 states have religious exemption laws for the provision of services. 2 states currently allow private businesses to deny services to married same-sex couples. 4 states allowed medical professionals to decline services to LGBTQ clients. 19 states allow individuals to select gender-neutral markers on their driver's licenses. However, 8 states currently require proof of surgery, court order, or amended birth certificates for transgender people to use their identified gender marker on their license. 20 states ban conversion therapy for minors, while 26 states still have no law or policy on the matter. So as you can see, these are laws that they cover a lot of different areas of people's lives. And as a result, they definitely, many of them, or lack of protective laws, perpetuate discrimination and stigma that we know with much research is perpetuating a lot of health and mental health disparities. So again, looking at some of the causes, Sharon touched a little bit about this, the barriers to care. So we can see that 42% of transgender patients reported having mistreatment by healthcare providers, and that's pretty significant. 29% of transgender respondents for a survey reported that healthcare provider refused to see them because of their sexual orientation or gender identity in the past year. And also 8% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual respondents also experienced a provider refusing to see them because of their sexual orientation. So those are pretty significant reasons that somebody might not get the care that they need. And of course, that can lead to larger problems. So the consequences of all of these challenges is that LGBTQ people are more likely to experience a host of mental, behavioral, and physical health inequalities. There's much evidence pointing to LGBTQ plus populations having a much greater rate of chronic disease, such as diabetes, coronary heart disease, certain forms of cancer, social health problems, such as violence, discrimination, exclusion, loneliness, and mental health symptoms and disorders, such as depression, anxiety, substance use, and suicide, which is alarming. LGBTQ plus individuals are more than twice as likely as heterosexual men and women to have a mental health disorder in their lifetime. LGBTQ plus individuals also remain targets for hate, violence because of their sexual orientation and or gender identity. So those are just some examples of the consequences of disparities that this population experiences. Okay, so why is LGBTQ health important? So eliminating LGBTQ plus health disparities and enhancing efforts to improve health access are necessary to ensuring that LGBTQ plus individuals can lead long, healthy lives. The many benefits of addressing health concerns and reducing disparities include reducing the progression and transmission of disease, increased mental, physical well-being, and overall quality of life, reduced healthcare costs, and increased longevity. So we can see why it's very important for a number of reasons that we really address some of these health inequities that are specifically targeting LGBTQ plus individuals. And if we're looking at different policies, there's current policies and past policies that have a really big impact on that. So for example, I just pulled up 3 here that are useful for talking about. The Ruthie and Connie LGBT Elder Americans Act of 2019. This was a bill that had a goal of it was legislation to amend the Older Americans Act of 1965 to provide equal treatment of LGBTQ older individuals and also for other purposes. It was introduced in 2019, but unfortunately it did not receive a vote. The next one, Diversity and Military Leadership Act. This was a bill to establish a grant program in the Department of Defense to increase the number of women, LGBTQ plus individuals, and underrepresented minorities in military and civilian leadership positions. And this bill also did not pass, unfortunately. Just recently, there was an executive order to implement the Bostock decision, providing or prohibiting discrimination in employment under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. And this includes, but is not limited to, employment, education, housing, healthcare, and credit. So you can see all different areas that that policy really will have a huge positive impact, hopefully, on the health and well-being of LGBTQ plus individuals. So the acceptance of LGBTQ plus individuals received from themselves, their families, and their society are all protective factors which dramatically affect their mental health and safety. So in order to create a culture and environment that supports the health and mental health equity of LGBTQ plus individuals, protective legislation and public education on sexual orientation and gender diversity is needed to address and reduce discrimination. So thank you so much for your time and for listening to our presentation. We hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new. Here's our references that we used, and we look forward to hearing your questions.